Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Beneath the broken heart of Commorragh, where light itself recoils and reality seems to bleed, the Grey Knights stepped where even the most jaded Drukari dare not tread. This was not the cold sanctity of a chapel, nor the disciplined order of a fortress monastery. It was the poisoned belly of the galaxy's greatest den of sin, shattered by calamity, and yet humming with a threat so primal that it gnawed at the soul of every brother present. Those who were there would not speak of it afterward, not to their commanders, not even to each other. The silence that followed their return was heavy with a dread no daemon ever conjured. For there, beneath the ruins of a city that should never have fallen, the Grey Knights found something so utterly outside the bounds of even their grim experience that the universe itself seemed smaller for having witnessed it. To imagine Commorragh is to picture a nightmare wearing the mask of a civilization. This is no simple city, no human hive nor Xeno sprawl. Commorragh stretches like a cancer through the webway, a metropolis built from the pain, ambition, and transcendent cruelty of the Drukari. For those rare outsiders who have seen it and survived, the city is a labyrinth of impossible geometry, an infinity of towering spires and yawning chasms, bridges that stretch across nothingness, and districts where time flows sideways. Shadows there do not simply fall. They stalk and whisper, promising ecstasies and agonies in equal measure. Every surface is a canvas for violence, every breath a gamble with oblivion. In the days before its ruin, Commorragh pulsed with a cruel vitality. Its bazaars offered forbidden relics and living souls. Its arenas ran slick with the blood of 1,000 species. Yet beneath that vibrant malice was an order, a hierarchy of cabals, cults, and covens, all jostling for supremacy, each a blade drawn against the other in a silent civil war. When calamity came, it was not the first such disaster to strike the Dark City, but it was the one that left the deepest wound. The cataclysm shattered not just architecture but psyche, severing whole districts from existence and folding others in upon themselves. The webway buckled, and with it the skein of reality frayed. Amid the ruin, something older than the city itself awoke. Commorragh's own children whispered of cursed places even they dared not enter, zones where light dissolved and gravity's hand grew fickle. The stench of ancient power mingled with the acrid tang of fear. For the Drukari, Commorragh was always a prison of their own making. Now it had become a tomb. To most of the Imperium, Commorragh remains a myth, a word for the place where nightmares are born, whispered by those few Eldari who have not yet forgotten what hope felt like. To the Inquisition, it is a tactical enigma, mapped only by rumor and blood. But to the Grey Knights, standing on the edge of the ruins, it was the last place in the galaxy they would willingly enter. Even so, they recognized what others could not, that the city's fall was not simply the result of internal strife or the eternal hunger of Slaanesh. Something had shifted in the webway itself, a flaw deeper and more profound than any Drukari scheme. Commorragh was both a riddle and a warning, a monument to what happens when pride outpaces wisdom and suffering becomes a sacrament. And now, with its bones exposed, it threatened to yield secrets that were never meant to be found. The Grey Knights do not swerve from their sacred path lightly. Born of the Emperor's own design and trained to face the deepest horrors of the warp, they exist to hunt demons and nothing else. At least, so the legends say. For them to be diverted, for a strike force to gather its brotherhood and plunge into the webway itself, an act of desperation or command from the highest echelons of the Inquisition must have occurred. What could possibly warrant such a violation of doctrine? Rumors whispered by throne agents speak of veiled orders delivered by those whose very names are erased from record. An ancient distress signal, perhaps, or a psychic scream traced to a dead star's shadow. Some among the Ordo Malleus would have it that prophecy and forbidden texts pointed to Commorragh's collapse as more than an Eldari tragedy. It was an omen, a sign that some ancient prison had weakened, its locks rusted by the agony of the Drukari. There is a cruelty to fate that the Grey Knights know all too well. This was not a sanctioned crusade, nor a matter of imperial politics. The strike force that entered Commorragh did so in silence, their thunderhawks slipping between webway fractures, shields raised against psychic interference, oaths sworn not only to secrecy but to annihilation. Should any brother falter, none must be allowed to return with taint upon his soul. The burden of their mission weighed heavier than Terminator plate. These warriors were selected not for their martial prowess alone, but for their absolute resilience against corruption. Each was a master exorcist, a slayer of demons, a living icon of the Emperor's will. But even among their number, an unspoken dread lingered. The sense that they were not so much hunting as being led. Why risk the few who stand against the warp's worst nightmares? What power could possibly lurk in the ruins of Commorragh? A place so drenched in suffering that demons themselves are drawn to its scent? Was this simply another warp incursion, or had something far more profound awoken? There are theories, heretical to some and essential to others, that Commorragh's destruction was not random, nor the act of a rival cabal. Some believe the Drukari, in their endless quest for sensation, pierced too deeply into the fabric of the webway, unraveling barriers better left untouched. Others whisper that the city's pain was a beacon, calling to something ancient and hungry. The Grey Knights, whatever their true orders, stepped forward not as hunters but as custodians, tasked not merely with banishment, but with containing a secret that could alter the balance between real space and the immaterium. They entered with the knowledge that the Emperor himself might turn his face from them, should they fail. For in this mission, there would be no reinforcements, no extraction, only the silence of the void and the hope that, should the worst come to pass, no one would ever know what was lost or found beneath the ashes of Commorragh. If you could have stood among the ruins, you would have tasted despair in the air. The aftermath of Commorragh's devastation was not mere destruction. It was an unmaking, as if the city's bones had been picked clean by something that did not obey the rules of time or nature. Where once there were towers that scraped the void, there now sprawled twisted heaps of psychoactive crystal and living metal, pulsing faintly with the aftershocks of ancient agony. The air was thin and raw, stinking of burned ozone and the coppery tang of blood long spilled and never cleansed. Walls shimmered between substance and shadow, the very matter of the city fluctuating, as if unsure whether to exist or to fade. The survivors, the few Drukari left behind, were less than wraiths, shivering specters in their own home, their eyes burned black by things seen and done. They wandered the fractured streets as though searching for the memory of power, clutching at totems of shattered pride. The Grey Knights, masters of their own fear and doubt, could sense what words could not describe. Something had leached the energy from this place, something older and colder than the predations of Slaanesh. The psychic residue was thick and bitter, coating the mind like a layer of ash. Even the dead seemed restless, their memories caught in loops of pain, whispers in every echo, screams in every footfall. Yet there was a strange, haunted beauty to it. The artistry of the Drukari had always been a celebration of pain and excess, but in ruin, it became a monument to the consequences of such devotion. Here, a colonnade carved with the torments of 1,000 ages stood toppled, its meaning lost. There, a statue of an Archon, half melted and half consumed by shadow, wept luminous tears that pooled into nothingness. Doorways yawned open into blackness deeper than mere void. The sense of loss was overwhelming, not only for the Dark Eldar, but for the universe itself. An entire civilization's suffering, now hollowed out and made raw for any who dared to look. It was in these echoes of catastrophe that the Grey Knights moved, each step a prayer against temptation and corruption. Their psychic wards flickered, battered by the raw emotion lingering in the ruins, the afterimages of lives spent in pursuit of pleasure and pain until both lost all meaning. Every chamber, every collapsed spire, whispered secrets, secrets not meant for mortal minds. There were hieroglyphs inscribed in the bones of the city, their meanings shifting and warping before the eye. Hallways seemed to move of their own accord, leading intruders in circles, or worse, into parts of Commorragh where reality grew thin. All around, the air thrummed with a tension that never dissipated, the sense that at any moment, the city itself might awaken, its rage and sorrow seeking new victims. The deeper one ventured, the more the city's ruins seemed to become alive, twisting not only space but memory. For the Grey Knights, this was not a battlefield. It was a living wound, one that bled the past into the present and dared any soul to try to heal it. To confront the Drukari on their home ground is to walk willingly into a predator's lair. But in the wake of the city's ruin, the surviving denizens were desperate, cornered, and more dangerous than ever. The Grey Knights advanced in silence, their presence a blasphemy against everything the Dark Eldar held sacred. Yet what they encountered was not open resistance, but a haunted guerrilla war, a battle fought in half-light and the edges of perception. The Drukari who remained were not the cackling sadists of the galaxy's terror stories, but hunted things, lashing out with a madness that was half rage, half terror. These were not warriors fighting for territory or pride, but for the hope that destroying the interlopers might appease whatever new curse haunted their city. In the twisting corridors and flickering shadows, the Drukari fought like ghosts, striking from nowhere, vanishing into smoke, their poison blades barely slowed by armor wrought for demon hunters. Every ambush was a desperate animal gamble. The air was thick with splinter rounds, psychic venom, and the shriek of dying souls, but the Grey Knights stood firm, bolstered by psychic bonds honed in battles against demons and nightmares. Yet even they felt the city's poison working on their resolve. Hallucinations stalked their minds, visions of ancient Drukari atrocities, glimpses of their own deaths, the seductive whisper of Slaanesh promising oblivion or glory. It was a battle fought as much within as without. What broke the Drukari's spirit was not simply martial might. It was the realization that the invaders were not there to conquer, nor to loot, but to find something deeper, something hidden. The Grey Knights' inexorable progress, methodical, unyielding, was a living judgment. The city itself seemed to sense this new sacrilege. Power flickered in and out, traps misfired, and labyrinthine pathways convulsed as if to vomit forth both prey and predator. The city's ancient mechanisms, designed for the exquisite torment of outsiders, now turned unpredictably on their masters. Drukari warriors were found impaled by their own defenses, their shrieks echoing down passageways that warped into impossible shapes. It was as if the city, wounded and enraged, was deciding to devour all who trespassed, Drukari and human alike. Despite their strength, the Grey Knights could not help but feel the weight of every step. With each clash, the line between hunter and hunted blurred. The psychers among them tasted the flavor of 1,000 nightmares with every breath. It was not just the psychic assault of the Drukari's pain engines, but the sense that something watched from below, something that made even the proudest Kabbalite warriors cower in the dark. The knights pressed on, fighting not just for survival but for knowledge. The dread certainty that something vital waited deeper in the city, something worth any sacrifice to find or destroy. It was a battle in which every victory felt hollow, every fallen enemy another grim step down a path no one truly wished to walk. In the end, the Drukari were not defeated. They simply scattered, driven by a terror beyond the reach of mortal violence. The city, once alive with their predatory laughter, was now filled with only the silence of those who had seen the abyss and had chosen to flee, rather than face what had been awoken beneath their own feet. Downward. That was the only direction left, the only axis that mattered. With the surface now emptied of resistance and the last wails of the Drukari faded into silence, the Grey Knights gathered in tight formation, senses straining against the oppressive darkness. The descent beneath Commorragh was unlike any mission in the material universe. The city's underways were no simple network of sewers or forgotten catacombs. They were wounds cut through ancient layers of reality, tunnels lined with living circuitry and fossilized pain. The walls pulsed with a dim, unnatural light, illuminating murals of torment that seemed to shift and bleed when unobserved. It was not merely claustrophobia the knights battled, but the feeling of passing into a place where time, memory, and substance itself became uncertain. Step by step, they ventured deeper, past vaults lined with relics whose meanings were lost even to the Drukari. Here and there, the remains of experiments gone wrong still twitched, their suffering locked in endless repetition, the psychic stench drawing shudders even from warriors who had faced daemons. Gravity itself rebelled in these depths. Floors sloped at impossible angles, corridors spiraled in Escher-like mockery, and doorways opened onto voids that gnawed at the mind. The knights pressed on, guided by psychic resonance and their unshakable faith, though even that faith wavered in the face of such relentless, unreasoning strangeness. Here, traps awaited not just the body, but the soul. Psychic snares lured the unwary with visions of loved ones lost, moments of personal failure, or the cold promise of oblivion's embrace. Some nights moved in silence, their faces set in iron resolve. Others chanted litanies, each syllable a shield against despair. The walls themselves seemed to watch, writhing with a hunger that defied explanation. Ancient Eldari glyphs twisted into new patterns, their meanings mutating as if mocking any attempt at understanding. The sense of trespass was total. Every step forward was a defilement, every breath a prayer that the city's true guardians remained asleep. Deeper still, the air thickened, charged with raw psychic energy that made every movement feel like wading through oil. Shadows thickened into presences. Statues of unknown Xeno's origin glared with accusing eyes. Pools of liquid darkness rippled with the hint of things moving just beneath the surface. Occasionally, the knights found signs that others had ventured here before. Scraps of ancient armor, shattered blades, symbols daubed in blood, and ichor that no tongue living or dead could speak. Nothing here died a clean death. Everything lingered, twisted by the city's hunger for sensation. At the threshold of the city's deepest vaults, the sense of wrongness became almost tangible. Here, time seemed to fold back upon itself. Echoes of screams, ancient and recent, blurred into a ceaseless cacophony. The Grey Knight's psychic shields were battered with memories not their own, an endless parade of horror and regret. But something else called them onward. A pulse, a presence, radiating from far below. It was not a beacon, not a lure, but a warning, a primal signal that something beneath Commorragh was awake, waiting, and older than the sins of any who had built the city above. There is a myth among the Eldari, spoken only in the oldest Craftworld libraries and whispered in the mad courts of the Harlequins, that Commorragh was built atop something older, a secret too shameful, even for a people accustomed to weaving lies into every shadow. As the Grey Knights pressed into the city's hidden depths, these stories became more than rumor. The air itself changed, colder, sharper, charged with the psychic residue of suffering so ancient it predated the birth cries of the Drukari. The architecture lost its decadent artistry, replaced by cyclopean stones etched with patterns that vibrated just out of sight, symbols that resonated on a level deeper than language or logic. The vaults beneath the city were not merely repositories of wealth or forbidden knowledge. They were tombs within tombs, memory palaces for sins that even the Drukari had tried to forget. It was here that the Grey Knights encountered the remnants of rituals so profane they warped the very stone. Bones were woven into the walls like veins, frozen screams echoed from sarcophagi too large for any Eldar. Doors made of living crystal pulsed with impossible colors, refusing to open until the knight's psychic wards were tested to their limit. The sense of intrusion became unbearable, as if the vault itself disapproved of their presence, resenting every breath they drew. There were places where light pooled unnaturally, refusing to move, and others where it bent away, casting shadows that seemed to think for themselves. Some chambers were filled with statues, too lifelike, their faces contorted in terror, as if an ancient gaze had turned victims to stone in the act of dying. The knights encountered cryptic murals, scenes of an Eldari past so ancient that even their own lorekeepers would have dismissed them as myth. Here were depicted sacrifices not to the gods of pleasure, but to entities unknown, monsters that seemed to crawl from the cracks between worlds, devouring hope and joy alike. It was in these vaults that the knights understood a terrible truth. The Drukari had not built their empire atop these places by accident. Rather, they had sought out this ancient agony, drawn to it like moths to a flame, their endless pursuit of sensation and torment, echoing a cycle that began long before their own fall. Every chamber was a monument to that unbroken chain of cruelty, a palimpsest of atrocity layered over the nightmares of races so old their names have been lost to entropy. The psychic resonance was overwhelming, washing over the nights in waves, each memory a knife, each echo a weight pressing down on mind and soul. Yet it was not the vaults themselves that chilled the soul, but what waited beyond them. For every locked door or collapsed passage seemed designed to mislead, to test the spirit of any who dared intrude. At the very threshold of comprehension, the knights felt something looking back, a presence so profound, so inimical to all sanity, that to recognize it was to risk annihilation of the self. The vaults of forgotten sin were not empty. They were a warning, a promise, and perhaps a prison. And the deeper the knights pressed, the more certain they became that this was a secret no mortal power should ever have tried to uncover. For most mortals, the distinction between real space and the immaterium is mercifully absolute, but beneath Commorragh, that line blurred until it barely existed at all. It began subtly. The Grey Knights noticed time losing its grip, seconds stretching and snapping, memories surfacing unbidden with the scent of burning ozone and old metallic blood. Some heard the echo of voices, long-dead brothers, the laughter of enemies slain, even the sound of their own hearts breaking in some distant past. The deeper they went, the thinner the walls between what was and what could be. The city's psychic wounds bled into the knights' minds. And even the strongest among them staggered beneath the weight of visions not their own. The warp is insidious, and it does not merely torment with daemons and phantoms. It seduces with possibility, offering alternate lives, whispered temptations that, for just a moment, feel more real than faith or duty. One knight found himself weeping at the memory of a childhood he never had. Another was haunted by the sight of Terra's throne room empty, its golden light snuffed forever. At the edge of perception, the sins of the Drukari replayed again and again. Unimaginable excess, cruelty elevated to art. Yet behind it all lurked a deeper despair. Some of the knights began to suspect that the Drukari were not merely victims or tormentors, but also prisoners, trapped by the same power that now pressed against the psychic barriers of their own minds. This was not possession, nor even direct attack, but an unraveling of the self. Faith, forged in the fires of Titan, was tested to the breaking point. The chanting of battle litanies became desperate, the Emperor's name a drowning man's gasp for air. It was not enough. Some knights felt themselves split, living dozens of lives at once, glorious victories, ignominious failures, deaths both heroic and pathetic. Each vision came with pain and with knowledge. The walls of the city shimmered with half-seen faces, each a mirror for the knights' secret fears. Were they here to save the Imperium, or to destroy something that could save it from itself? The question festered in their minds, carried on a tide of madness from which no psychic discipline could grant relief. And yet, through all this, the knights pressed on. There was a rhythm to the city's psychic assault, a pattern in the chaos that hinted at purpose. The visions grew more coherent, as if the city, or whatever slept beneath it, was testing the intruders, measuring their worth. For some, the hallucinations became prophetic, glimpses of a galaxy forever changed by what they found, of a darkness unbound, of hope twisted into a weapon. For others, it was simply the agony of memory, every sin and failure laid bare. Through it all, the city whispered, not in any language, but in raw sensation, a chorus of longing, fear, hunger, and unquenchable despair. When the Grey Knights finally reached the innermost sanctum, their minds and souls battered near the breaking point, they understood that what they faced was not a daemon in the usual sense, but something else entirely. The veil was thin here, so thin that to breathe was to taste infinity, to close one's eyes was to risk never opening them again. They were on the edge of revelation or annihilation, and only their faith, tattered, desperate, and defiant, stood between them and the abyss that waited to claim them whole. There is no record in the Librarius of Titan, no scribe on Holy Terra, who could catalog what the Grey Knights found beneath the heart of Commorragh. The words we use, daemon, warp entity, horror, are hollow masks for a truth far older and more monstrous than any scripture has prepared us to face. When the final vault was breached, the sanctum within was neither chamber nor prison, but an intersection of realities. The walls were composed of memory and raw sensation, swirling with the echoes of a million lives cut short, yet layered with patterns that suggested intent, even hunger. What emerged from the darkness was not a creature in any form known to the Imperium. It was an idea given shape, a remnant of the ancient war that predated the fall, a psychic infection so virulent it warped the stone around it, erasing identity and feeding on meaning itself. To the eyes of the Grey Knights, trained to pierce deception and resist temptation, the entity appeared in a multitude of forms. Some saw a vast shadow, flickering with faces of Eldari and human alike, wailing in an unending chorus of regret. Others witnessed nothing but a cold, crystalline intelligence, utterly alien, pressing against the boundaries of perception with questions older than language. Its presence was an assault on all certainty, a pressure that eroded the soul's foundations, forcing each knight to relive not just their own sins, but the sins of their species. Time itself warped in its presence. Some reported living lifetimes in the space of a heartbeat, each a failed attempt to resist or contain the impossible. There are those among the Ordo Malleus who would theorize that this thing was a proto-demon, an echo of a pre-chaos era, a fragment of the primordial darkness that existed before the gods of the warp found names and followers. To the Drukari, whose ancestors might once have worshipped or bargained with such beings, it was a reminder of the true nature of suffering, not the brief pain of flesh, but the slow, corrosive despair that eats away at all hope. For the Grey Knights, it was a trial unlike any faced before. Their psychic defenses shattered in waves. Faith was not a shield but a mirror, reflecting every fear and regret. Some fell, not to violence, but to the slow erasure of self, their memories unraveling into the fabric of the chamber. Others fought on in a haze of agony and defiance, chanting the Emperor's name until it was little more than a noise lost to the immensity of the dark. It was not victory or banishment that ended the confrontation, but a desperate act of self-sacrifice. One knight offering his soul as an anchor, binding the entity for a moment long enough to allow the others to flee or attempt containment. The psychic shockwave that followed nearly tore the sanctum apart. In that instant, every survivor glimpsed the truth, not of chaos, but of the void that lies beneath it, the hunger that predates the gods and may yet survive their deaths. The entity was not destroyed, it was contained, for now, its prison patched with the last shreds of faith and the blood of those too stubborn to surrender. And as the chamber sealed, the city above seemed to sigh, a sound equal parts relief and warning, echoing through the bones of Commorragh and out into the wider webway. In the wake of their encounter, the surviving Grey Knights did not celebrate. No songs were sung, no oaths of victory exchanged. The silence as they made their way back through the collapsed vaults and shadowed corridors was deeper than any before. The city's ruins felt emptier, the psychic static faded to a background thrum, but the knights themselves carried the true cost of what had transpired. Each step was heavier, not with exhaustion, but with the realization that some things once seen cannot be forgotten, and some wounds never heal. For a brotherhood accustomed to purging the galaxy's nightmares, the deepest scars were not the ones left by daemons, but by the things that made even daemons seem knowable by comparison. Loss hung in the air like incense. Some knights had fallen in battle, their bodies unrecoverable, their souls hopefully claimed by the Emperor's light. Yet the true toll was subtler, more insidious. Brothers who had once stood unshakable now glanced at shadows with haunted eyes. Psychic wounds, invisible to all but the most skilled apothecaries, gnawed at the spirit. Memories bled into waking thought, a chorus of voices, 1,000 regrets, the weight of what had been glimpsed in the entity's presence. The sense of isolation grew, even among those who survived, a bond formed by suffering so intimate that words became meaningless. Perhaps the most profound loss was certainty. The Grey Knights had always walked the narrow line between faith and knowledge, between the Emperor's promise and the awful truth of the galaxy. What they found beneath Commorragh stretched that line to breaking. If there were things beneath even chaos, forces so alien and relentless that not even the gods could master them, what hope remained for lesser beings? Some knights clung harder to faith. Others drifted into a kind of numb resignation. The sense of purpose that had driven them now felt threadbare. The galaxy, a colder and less comprehensible place. But not all was loss. In the crucible of this ordeal, a kind of fierce pride was forged. The knights who endured had faced not only the enemy but themselves. The knowledge that one of their own had sacrificed everything to contain a horror without name became a new kind of legend, one spoken in whispers and memorialized not in song, but in silent prayer. The survivors carried with them fragments of forbidden knowledge, symbols glimpsed in the darkness, the echo of a hunger that predates the gods, the certainty that some evils are best left unnamed, and some victories measured only by the survival of a few battered souls. In the end, what the Grey Knights lost was innocence, a luxury never abundant among daemon hunters, but one they now understood as a shield they could never reclaim. What they gained was harder to name. A warning, a burden, and a new kind of strength forged in the shadows beneath the galaxy's darkest city. The tale of the Grey Knights' descent beneath Commorragh did not end with their return, nor was its impact contained within the shattered bones of the Dark City. The webway itself, a network of impossibilities woven by ancient hands, trembled with the aftershocks of what had transpired. Among the Drukari, whispers spread like infection. Survivors spoke of a new curse, an affliction deeper than the predations of Slaanesh, a sense that some essential darkness had been disturbed. The Cobbles grew paranoid, striking out not just at each other but at unseen enemies, convinced that the city's doom had been sealed by this final trespass. Some among the homunculi covens vanished into their laboratories, intent on unearthing ancient pacts or discovering how to seal what had been opened. Among the Eldari of the craft worlds, there was a trembling of the spirit stones, a psychic resonance echoing the trauma of the webway. Farseers cast their runes in dread, glimpsing ripples in fate that threatened not only Commorragh but the fabric of the webway itself. It was as if a great predator had stirred from slumber, casting a shadow over all who called the labyrinth home. Rumors spread of rifts opening where there should be none, of shadows devouring whole patrols, of a chill in the soul that even the most stoic aspect warriors could not dismiss. Nor did the Imperium remain untouched. The Inquisition, ever watchful for hints of corruption or heresy, redoubled its scrutiny of the Ordo Malleus. Questions were asked in the halls of power that had no safe answers. What had the Grey Knights unleashed? Was the price of secrecy too high, or had it always been an illusion? Some whispered that the Emperor himself had wept, others that this was the beginning of a new age of darkness. The Grey Knights who returned from Commorragh were marked, not with visible scars, but with a weight that none outside their brotherhood could understand. The chapter's librarians locked away their records, searing memories from their own minds and redacting reports with holy fire. Yet in the shadows, rival powers grew curious. The Thousand Sons, always seeking forbidden knowledge, cast their gaze toward the ruins. The Black Library's keepers debated whether to intervene, fearing what might crawl from the vaults beneath Commorragh into the greater webway. Even the Harlequins paused in their eternal dance, haunted by visions of something that would not fit into any mask, a player who broke the rules of the great cosmic jest. There are fan theories, half joked, half feared, that the entity contained beneath Commorragh was a harbinger, a piece of the primordial void that even the gods of chaos could not claim. If such a power were to escape, it would not merely warp the galaxy but unravel it, stripping the meaning from reality itself. Others argue that the ordeal was a test, that the galaxy now faces a reckoning not with chaos, but with the emptiness that comes before and after. The threads of fate, once taut with the tension of endless war, now quiver in uncertainty, and all who walk the webway feel the chill of something new, a silence more terrifying than any scream. In the end, the legacy of the Grey Knights' descent beneath the ruins of Commorragh is not found in any triumph or proclamation, but in a silent understanding that echoes through every brother who returned and every shadow that lingered after. The city itself stands as a scar in the webway, its foundations forever changed by what was unearthed and nearly unbound. For those who dwell in the endless dark, life continues with a new layer of fear, a brittle edge to every pleasure, a sense that some secrets are best left untouched. The Drukari have not recovered. Their city is quieter now, its torments tinged with an anxiety they dare not name. The craft worlds speak of the incident only in riddles, and the Inquisition files their own accounts in vaults so deep even memory fears to follow. Among the Grey Knights, the tale endures as both a warning and a point of pride, a story told in low voices, in the chapels of reflection, where scars are bared and faith reforged. They have become the bearers of an impossible burden, guardians not just against demons, but against the primal emptiness that underlies all nightmares. The knowledge of what lies beneath Commorragh has marked them, a brand upon their souls. But it has also made them more than warriors. It has made them custodians of the thin line between the galaxy and what hungers beyond. Every war they now fight, every ritual of cleansing, is shadowed by what they saw, by the awareness that there are evils even the gods fear, and that the greatest victories sometimes come at the cost of innocence, certainty, and even hope. There are moments in a warrior's life that change everything, even for those bred to resist the warp's temptations and walk among shadows without fear. The ordeal beneath Commorragh marked such a moment for the Grey Knights, not only in the pages of forbidden history, but within the very fabric of their order. As the psychic scars of the descent slowly festered, it became clear that this mission had left a wound deeper than any blade or daemon could inflict. For the first time in living memory, the Brotherhood of Titan felt itself divided, not in purpose, but in understanding, shaken to the marrow by the truth that some secrets lie beyond even their legendary resolve. In the weeks that followed their return, subtle changes swept through the chapter. The survivors, men who had stared into the abyss and returned, carried with them an aura of otherness that even their closest brothers could not easily penetrate. Their eyes lingered longer in prayer, voices sometimes faltered in litanies, and there were times, especially in the haunted silence before dawn, when the veterans of Commorragh seemed almost to listen for something just beyond hearing. Many began to alter the rituals of purity, adapting old traditions to address dangers that had never before been named. In the sanctified reclusium, candles were lit in unfamiliar patterns. Sigils of warding were carved with greater care, and prayers included new invocations, not just against the warp, but against the emptiness that now haunted their dreams. Librarians found themselves struggling to record what had transpired. Words twisted beneath their pens, recollections faded or returned in kaleidoscopic fragments, and those who pressed hardest for clarity risked being swept away by the entity's residual influence. Some called for an exorcism of memory itself, while others argued that the chapter must never again speak of what had been found. The debate grew fierce in the council chambers, with old certainties falling away one by one. For a chapter built upon unity and secrecy, this discord was a new and poisonous thing. Some knights clung fiercely to the codex, trusting in ritual and discipline to seal away the cracks. Others, more quietly, gathered in hidden corners, seeking meaning in the chaos, daring to wonder if the threat beneath Commorragh was merely a sign of something greater. Something cosmically inevitable. The psychic link binding the Grey Knights, always strong, always pure, became laced with uncertainty. In battle, some found their powers unreliable, their faith slipping at the edge of terror's memory. Others discovered strange new strengths, as if the ordeal had scarred their souls in ways both terrible and profound. Chaplains spoke of visions, a cold void devouring the stars, the Emperor's light flickering at the edge of an endless, silent abyss. Some believed these were warnings, others omens of coming disaster. The Grey Knights became more isolated, even from the Inquisition that claimed to command them. Reports were redacted, missions refused, and one by one the Brotherhood turned inward, trying to bind up wounds that would not close. Yet even in this darkness, a new kind of unity began to emerge. A unity born not from ignorance, but from the shared burden of forbidden knowledge. In the chapter's silent vaults, the survivors of Commorragh swore oaths that had no precedent, vowing to shield the Imperium not only from daemons and warp spawn, but from the ancient hunger that sleeps beneath reality itself. They became the keepers of a new watch, guardians of the threshold where meaning frays. New rites were born in secrecy, words spoken over the wounded, symbols traced in dust, the echo of a prayer that no one outside the order would ever hear. For every brother lost in the descent, a new tradition was kindled, a reminder that even the mightiest can fall, and that sometimes the only victory is to survive at all. This transformation did not go unnoticed. Other chapters, sensing the subtle change, began to treat the Grey Knights with a wariness bordering on awe. Some whispered that they had become something new, something more than human and less than angelic. Within the Ordo Malleus, suspicions grew. Inquisitors sent envoys, seeking answers they would never receive, and when none returned, the silence only deepened the myth. Rumors spread in the void. Stories of Grey Knights who did not bleed, whose eyes shone with the cold light of the stars, whose prayers echoed with the weight of horrors best left unnamed. But for the Brotherhood of Titan, the truth was far simpler and far more tragic. They had looked into the dark beneath the dark, and in doing so had become both its wardens and its victims. Every battle, every cleansing, every act of heroism now bore the faint shadow of what had been endured in Commorragh's depths. And in the hidden corners of the fortress monastery, as the long night stretched on, the Grey Knights kept watch. Not just for the next incursion, but for the silence, for the sense that somewhere in the galaxy's endless night, the hunger beneath the world might one day stir again. There are stories whispered in the warp, tales carried by the tides of madness and fear, that even daemons speak of with hesitation. Long after the Grey Knights left Commorragh's depths, the wound they had opened did not heal. In the twisting unreality of the immaterium, where thought shapes form and hunger becomes flesh, the echo of that encounter rippled outward in ways no mortal could predict or control. It was not only a scar upon the city or its denizens, but a distortion in the very fabric of the warp, a disturbance that called to things best left dreaming and unsettled those who dwell within the storm. In the weeks following the Knight's return, warp travel across the segmentum became fraught with new perils. Astropaths screamed in the night, their dreams thick with visions of a cold hunger stirring in the darkness. Navigators spoke of storms that moved against all logic, of strange tides that pulled ships toward unseen abysses. In places where the warp was once calm, eddies of shadow now churned, birthing ghost images and memories that did not belong to any living soul. Daemon hosts, usually cunning in their deceptions, fell into fits of silence or babbled in tongues none had ever recorded before. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica recorded a spike in psychic trauma, a surge of suicides, fugue states, and unexplained disappearances among its ranks. For the denizens of the warp, the change was even more profound. Lesser daemons began to avoid certain currents, driven by instinct to shun invisible boundaries now etched into unreality by the trauma beneath Commorragh. Greater powers felt the shift more keenly. In the court of Slaanesh, the Prince of Excess shuddered in delight and unease. The feast of Drukari souls, once a staple, now carried a bitter aftertaste, as if something within had soured. The Lords of Change saw new variables in their schemes, threads and fate tangled and knotted in ways that even their labyrinthine intellects could not untangle. The blood god's own demons felt their rage dimmed for a moment by a hunger not their own, an echo of a primordial emptiness beyond violence. Perhaps most deeply affected were the psychers and sensitives of the galaxy, those cursed or blessed to hear the warp's whispers. On distant worlds, children woke screaming, sketching spirals and sigils none could explain. Eldar farseers found their visions clouded, every scrying leading to a black void where eyes cannot follow. Orc weirdboys grew more erratic, their raucous energies sputtering as if the green tide itself recoiled from the memory of the dark beneath the dark. Even the Necrons, soulless as they are, recorded odd readings in their tombs, anomalous data, impossible fluctuations in the Empyrean background, as if the universe itself momentarily hiccuped. Yet it was not merely fear that spread, but a kind of calling. Across the warp, entities stirred, ancient, patient, and cold. Some drifted closer to real space, curious or hungry, seeking the source of the disturbance. Others retreated, recognizing the taste of a force older than the gods, older than the warp itself. There are those among the demon princes who claim to remember an age before the warp was colored by mortal thought, when emptiness ruled and only silence reigned. To them, the events beneath Commorragh were a portent, a warning that the old hunger had not been forgotten, that it waits still, coiled and watchful, beneath the dreams and nightmares of all sentient life. The Grey Knights themselves felt this change, though few could speak of it directly. Their nightmares became windows onto the immaterium, scenes of cities drowning in shadow, stars snuffed by invisible hands, hope consumed by the endless hunger that does not bear a name. Battle rituals became more severe, psychic shields were redoubled, and even the most experienced brothers found themselves pausing just for a heartbeat before invoking the Emperor's light. Some, especially the oldest, began to sense presences at the edge of perception, watching, weighing, perhaps even judging. Was this the beginning of a new age of nightmares? Or merely another ripple in a sea that had never truly been calm? One thing was certain. The warp itself had been changed. What lay beneath Commorragh was not merely a threat to flesh and blood, but to the idea of reality itself. The lines between meaning and madness had grown thinner, the walls between hope and hunger less certain. In the cold heart of the immaterium, a new legend began to take shape. One not of heroes or villains, but of a shadow that walks behind all things. Patient, formless, waiting for the next breach, the next wound, the next soul, bold or foolish enough to seek forbidden knowledge in places better left forgotten. And so across the galaxy, the warp whispered a new warning. Not in words, but in shivers, in nightmares, in moments of silence between the screams. The memory of Commorragh's wound had become a living thing, a myth in the making, and even the gods watched, uncertain, for what might one day emerge from the shadow beneath the shadow. In the hidden vaults beneath Terra, where the light of day has never touched, and even the most exalted of inquisitors must tread carefully, the story of what happened beneath Commorragh began to unravel the web of secrecy that the Ordo Malleus had spent millennia weaving. No ordinary report sufficed. The Grey Knights who survived, bound by oaths deeper than gene coding, sent only the most heavily encrypted astropathic signals, so layered with misdirection and code that entire centuries could pass before a single outsider unraveled their meaning. Yet the Inquisition has always thrived on secrets, and it did not take long for whispers to travel. What began as a rumor among interrogators soon became an obsession among the most paranoid and ambitious Lords Inquisitor, sparking a shadow war fought not with armies, but with information and silence. The first sign that something was wrong appeared in the libraries of the Ordo Malleus. Records referencing Commorragh were quietly expunged, files redacted with sigils that burned away the memories of any who tried to read too closely. High Gothic treatises vanished from shelves, grimoires were bound in chains and sunk into the deepest oubliettes. Those who asked too many questions found themselves assigned to remote death worlds, or worse, inducted into the black ships for psychic reevaluation. Librarians and archivists learned quickly not to speak the name of the Dark City, and the few who persisted in their curiosity were swiftly silenced, sometimes by polite dismissal, sometimes by the quiet disappearance that marks the Inquisition's truest justice. Within the Ordo's own ranks, suspicion grew. Some theorized that the Grey Knights had stumbled upon an ancient tool, a weapon or artifact, capable of threatening not just demons, but the very existence of the warp. Others whispered of a prison, an old enemy of the Emperor that had been locked away before even the founding of the Imperium, now disturbed by the hubris of Xenos and humanity alike. The most radical among the Inquisitors argued that the entity should be studied, even bargained with, while Puritans recoiled in horror at the suggestion, demanding exterminatus-level solutions for any region touched by the event. Arguments spilled from the council chambers into the streets of Terra's hive cities, disguised as heretical cult uprisings or insurrections, but at their core, the debates were about the nature of reality itself, and who had the right to shape its boundaries. The highest circles of the Inquisition grew consumed with paranoia. The Lord Inquisitor, who first read the unedited Grey Knight's log, was found dead in his sanctum. A look of utter terror frozen on his features. No wound visible, save for the sigil of the Inquisition carved into the steel of his desk by a hand not his own. From that point forward, every message referencing Commorragh was double-coded, sent only by trusted agents, and erased from existence immediately upon receipt. Secret conclaves were called, and oaths were sworn so severe that even the Grey Knights, when summoned, were forbidden to speak except in the most abstract metaphors. Some among the Ordo began to fear that even knowledge of the entity was itself a vector of infection, a mimetic hazard that could spread through word and thought, warping reality wherever it was spoken. The most desperate inquisitors sought guidance from forbidden sources. Diviners and sanctioned psychers were pressed into service until their minds snapped or their bodies failed. A handful, driven by terror or ambition, delved into the Black Library itself, seeking harlequin guides or eldritch bargains that might promise a way to contain the damage or erase the entity's memory altogether. A few never returned. Those who did came back haunted, refusing to speak of what they had seen, carrying strange symbols branded into their flesh that bled ink and shadows in the candlelight. A creeping terror began to spread within the highest halls of power. What if the Emperor himself was not unaware but unable to intervene? What if the Grey Knights, in their zeal, had only delayed an apocalypse that was always inevitable? Debates raged in hidden conference chambers. Should the event be buried, or should preparations begin for a greater threat yet to come? Ancient vaults were opened. Artifacts predating the Horus Heresy were brought out and tested against psychic wards, just in case. The Inquisition's hidden armies drilled for wars they could not name. And always beneath the surface was the knowledge that what had been found beneath Commorragh could not be destroyed, only forgotten, or perhaps endured. In the end, the Ordo Malleus did what it has always done. It turned its fear into vigilance, its uncertainty into doctrine. New codes were written, new oaths sworn in blood and shadow, binding a new generation of inquisitors to secrets so terrible that even their nightmares could not contain them. And in the silent hours before dawn, when Terra's spires are lost in cloud and memory, the highest lords of the Ordo Malleus pray, not for victory, but for the strength to remember what must never be spoken, and the will to act should the darkness beneath reality ever reach up again. In the hidden arteries of Commorragh, long after the Grey Knights had vanished into myth, the Drukari survivors struggled beneath the weight of what had been unleashed. To outsiders, the Drukari are infamous for their cruelty, for the callous artistry of their pain and their worship of sensation above all else. But the trauma that radiated from the city's violated underworld was of a kind no torment engine could replicate, and no narcotic could dull. Whispers circulated in the shattered halls, whispers of the pale knights who had descended and of the horror they had failed to destroy, a hunger deeper than even Slanish's appetite. For the first time in memory, the lords and vassals of the Dark City learned the taste of true fear. It began subtly. The first to feel it were the homunculi, those master fleshcrafters whose veins ran thick with forbidden knowledge. In their hidden labs, they reported failures of their most trusted protections. Shards of living crystal cracked with no cause, runes flickered, and the once reliable psychic wards sputtered out like candles in a void. Experiments that should have ended in transcendent agony instead resulted in silence, as if the city itself was refusing to scream. More troubling still, some of the Coven's most ancient minds spoke in riddles, lapsing into fugues and repeating scraps of myth from before the fall. When pressed, they would only mutter about a shadow within the shadow, something older than any god, and how the price of power had finally come due. The kobolds fared no better. The archons, masters of intrigue and paranoia, became even more insular, lashing out with violence at the slightest provocation. But behind their cruelty was a gnawing sense of impotence. Informants disappeared without a trace. Forbidden devices malfunctioned, exploding in cold, silent bursts of light that left only stains and the echo of distant hunger. Rumors swirled that some archons had begun to dream, an abomination for Drukari, whose minds are fortified against all but the most exquisite nightmares. These dreams were not of conquest or revenge, but of endless corridors, hollow statues, and the feeling of being watched by something utterly indifferent. The witch cults, normally at the vanguard of the city's decadent spectacles, found their audiences dwindling. Blood no longer quickened the heart as it once had, screams lost their savor, and the exultation of violence grew hollow. In the heat of battle, some witches reported brief flashes of another place, a vault of darkness beneath the city, cold and empty, where even the dead dared not linger. At first, these visions were dismissed as mere side effects of their chemical excesses, but soon the cult leaders began to recognize a pattern. The city's malaise was more than psychic pollution. It was as if Commorragh's very soul had been leached by the encounter with the Grey Knights and the thing they had barely contained. As the malaise deepened, the city's customs began to shift. Temples that once pulsed with forbidden energy now lay abandoned, their priesthoods broken by doubt and fear. The worship of Slaanesh itself, never fully open but always present, became a shadow of a shadow. Prayers spoken in half-voices, offerings left to rot, as if the Drukari believed their goddess could no longer hear them. In her place, a new anxiety grew. A fear not just of pain or predation, but of meaninglessness, of a cosmic void that nothing, no pleasure, no pain, no atrocity, could ever fill. Some among the Drukari tried to adapt. New rituals sprang up in the aftermath, desperate attempts to patch the psychic wound left by the incursion. Homunculi fashioned charms from the remnants of broken wards, believing these tokens might ward off the hunger beneath the city. Cabals turned to the most forbidden lore, seeking bargains not with demons but with echoes, fragments, and things without names. There were even rumors of strange alliances, Drukari seeking out Harlequin troops or Craftworld exodites, hoping that ancient enemies might hold secrets that could repair the city's fractured spirit. But not all who survived found the strength to adapt. Many succumbed to ennui or despair, their once-burning ambition fading to dust. Some sought oblivion in the arenas, their deaths a silent protest against a universe that had suddenly grown too vast, too empty, and too cold. The most sensitive fled into the webway, searching for new sources of sensation or power, but many found only echoes, reflections of the hunger they had hoped to escape, waiting for them in every shadowed corridor. In the end, the Drukari learned what it meant to be prey in their own city. The incursion beneath Commorragh changed them, not merely as individuals but as a culture. It was a lesson written in fear, in silence, and in the knowledge that for all their mastery of suffering, there are wounds that will never heal. The dark city endures, as it always has, but now every spire and shadow is haunted by the memory of a darkness deeper than their own, and a hunger that not even gods can name. For those of us who peer into the lore, who hunger for answers, perhaps that is the final lesson. The galaxy is stranger and more terrifying than we can ever know. Some mysteries are invitations to ruin, and some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. But still we search, and still we wonder, because within that darkness is the promise that there's always something more, a deeper story, a greater peril, and a spark of heroism that endures even when all seems lost. If you've enjoyed delving into these hidden corners of the Warhammer universe with me, and you want to explore even more forbidden legends and unsolved mysteries, make sure to subscribe and join our fellowship of the Grimdark Curious. The shadows are always deeper than they seem, and there's always another secret waiting to be found.